Did the Romans meet aliens? I don't think so. But this is a mosaic from Carmona, Spain, and this person in the bottom corner, they sure look like an alien to me. There's no description other than the fact that it's a mosaic of the four seasons, so I thought I better learn a little bit more about how the Romans represented the four seasons. Luckily, around World War II, this guy, George Hanfmann, it's a pretty serious looking guy, wrote a book on the representations of the seasons in ancient art, and it's still the go-to guide 85 years later. And that person, unfortunately, not an alien. It started with the Greeks, who represented the seasons as hore, which translates as season or hour. They generally only had 2 or 3, because in early Greek thought there were only 3 seasons, which was spring, the summer harvest, and then winter. This one's the first surviving representation of them on Greek pottery. It's the Francois vase at the Florence Museum from about 560 BC. It's hard to read in this picture, but the painter actually labeled them. It was very common in early pottery since most characters at this time didn't yet have distinguishing attributes. Attributes are basically things in ancient art that characters hold or wear so they're recognizable. I'll put a card in the upper right to a video I did on recognizing attributes. Since they're hard to identify, and sometimes 2 or 3, there's lots of controversy. For example, here are the marble statues taken from the east pediment of the Parthenon in Athens. Let's not get into why they're in London. There's a group that believes the 2 figures on the left side are hore. Here they are. And there's a group that believe that the 3 on the right side are hore. It's really hard to tell, and it's just as likely that none of them are hore. You just have to assume that the ancients would have recognized them either by attributes that have fallen off since, or by the context that's in the pediment. Finally, artists started adding attributes to help differentiate them. As an example of this pot, one has flowers, one has a wreath and her head covered, and then the third is holding a branch. This is kind of the start of the seasonal attributes that we'll see more refined later. The Greeks adopted 4 seasons in about the 4th or 5th century BC, after they had a better sense of the solar cycle, and then it made a lot more sense to divide the year into 4 equal seasons. That then takes us to the Romans. They had a lot of gods and associated religious activities, but not the seasons. So that concept had to move from the Greeks to the Romans, and this was first documented in about the 1st century BC by Varro in his book on agriculture. Finally, in 8 AD, Ovid gives us the 8 seasons in his book Metamorphosis, along with their attributes. Here spring appears with flowery chaplets bound. Here summer with her wheaten garland crowned. Here autumn with rich trodden grapes besmear, and hoary winter shivering in the rear. The seasons then became very popular on sarcophagi in Rome, and here's a really great example from the Cleveland Art Museum, made in about 100 AD. The museum is really great if you have a chance to visit. I probably spent about 100 hours there when my daughter was a student at Case. Anyway, the seasons are running from right to left. We have winter has a hood, although it's not fully covering her head, but there's a bird as well as reeds in the basket. Reeds become a very important attribute for her. Spring is more lightly dressed with a basket of flowers, so that comes straight from Ovid. Summer is semi-nude with wheat, again, pretty standard. And then autumn usually has fruit, either grapes or plums or something like that. The seasons can be represented with different gods. So for example, Dionysus, because the seasons are required to grow grapes. Helios, because the sun drives the seasons. Or even Persephone, because going back and forth to the underworld, she drives the seasons as well. Then there's the seasons sarcophagus at Dunbarton Oaks. Most of the attributes in their hands have broken off, but the guy on the left is Winter, and you can recognize him because he's Attis, which becomes a thing. If you're interested in the story of Attis, look it up, but I don't need this video to have viewership issues. So you can recognize him by the toggled pants he's wearing and the Phrygian hat, very stylish. And then finally, each of the seasons can have an emotional support animal. So then just to summarize each of the seasons along with their attributes, spring is flowers, that's a biggie. and then sometimes partly nude, sometimes a wreath and a goat, but sometimes the goat is also autumn, so you can't always go with that. Summer is wheat, semi-nude or fully nude, a sickle for the harvest, and then has a lion. Fall is fruit, usually grapes, but sometimes also figs, and then the animal is a panther. Then finally, winter is pretty much always heavily dressed and cloaked, carrying sticks or reeds. It's hunting time, so there can be a dog, or game animals, usually a boar, sometimes a dead duck, a dead rabbit. There's olives, because that's olive harvesting time, a shepherd's hook, and he can also be an old guy, as in this tomb from the Nassanii, or as I said before, could look like Attis. So that takes us back to the mosaic at Carmona. The lady in the upper right has a basket of flowers, so I call her spring. One could argue that it's a basket of fruit, but to me, those look like flowers, and so that's what I'm going to say. The lady in the upper left has a pitchfork, so clearly she's ready to harvest. She's summer. The lower right has a cornucopia, so she's ready to harvest fruit, so I would call her that. One could also argue that she has flowers in her hair and in her dress, so she's spring, but to me, I see a cape and I see fall leaves. But most important, the alien in the bottom here is a heavily dressed and hooded woman, so she is winter. The end. If you enjoyed this video, or even if you didn't, please like, share, subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything I've said, and I'll see you later.